So I'd like to welcome to the stage our final two presenters of the morning, which is a dual headliner, I believe. And so that's David Ward, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Portsmouth Business School, who I think in the spirit of Doug bringing together commercial, academic and government best practice has a really interesting background with 20 years in commercial experience prior to moving across into academia. And Paul Longley, I'm not sure, is Paul joining the stage now, or are you you're doing a tag team halfway through? Right, I'll kind of partly introduce Paul as well to save me doing it in the middle. Paul is the Professor of Geographic Information Science at the University of College London, and in the essence of speed, I won't go through Paul's very lengthy list of impressive academic achievements, but looking at his biography with 48 research grants in excess of 18 million, I'm thinking of asking him to negotiate my research budget for next year. And with that, over to David.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to this conference. And I'm conscious that Paul and I are standing between you and your lunch, so let's try and make this fairly efficient. I represent Portsmouth Business School, and believe it or not, Portsmouth is in the top global 2% of universities. I showed this slide to one of my colleagues recently, and he said, "Oh no, you made a mistake, isn't it 20%? And no, it's 2%, and this is a very, very fresh statistic. Think about our vision. We're very much like any other business school, I guess, and we want to be innovative and influential in higher education, research and outreach activity. And I like to think that my being here at this conference today ticks all those boxes in terms of how working with industry, working with the public sector in sharing data can help us improve our standing in terms of our education to our students, the research activity that we do, we engage in, and also the outreach activity. One of my remits, as well as being a marketing lecturer, is to work with local organisations, national organisations, and developing the relationship between the university and the business and public sector community. And our areas of expertise, I guess, fairly standard list there of areas of expertise. That's me. And as Martin said, I've come from a commercial background, and I think one of the attractions for me of coming at academia was trying to bridge the gap between academia and an industry. I often felt as an early career marketeer that any kind of discussion about, well, why do we do this, or how does this work, was often met with, well, no, we've just got to do this, we've got to move on, we've got to, and, I always had this curiosity. I always wanted to understand a bit more, and I think the academic realm was always seen as, well, that's like, you're being very academic, we just got to get on with it. But I think both sides can learn from each other, can share information and share approaches and best practice. But in short, in terms of this presentation, if you only want to take 30 seconds from this presentation and go back to sleep, the simple message is we need your data. We are very keen to work collaboratively with industry and with the public sector. And in terms of what we want to look at is looking very quickly at some of those opportunities for collaboration and cooperation. Talk about the impact agenda and how universities have to demonstrate their economic value to the UK. Some examples of how data sharing could be beneficial, and also very briefly to look at some potential barriers and also enablers. I think there's some very good positive things and positive benefits of working together. So in terms of opportunities for collaboration, what sort of data does academics need? Well, in short, it's all kinds of data. It could be operational data, information about customers, it could be quantitative, qualitative. There's a massive realm of information that we can use to support data modelling, support building hypotheses. So it's quite a realm. And often we are employing that very sophisticated statistical technique called guessing to develop these models. So having data actually helps support some of our work. And I'll give you a couple of examples in a second. How valuable and useful is research? Is data in research? Well, very, very useful. it's certainly helpful in terms of developing use cases and also to have a proper insight into what is most likely to happen. And also particularly useful when we think about how models can be applied in specific situations. So we want to move from the purely theoretical perspective to a much more applied basis. And also there's some value, again, from a teaching perspective, about accessing data for students. It's very easy to discuss with students about various scenarios or various examples, but until they've actually got their hands dirty with data and have done some manipulation and actually come up and seen some results, it's quite difficult for them to visualize. So, and I think it's more useful for them to have up-to-date or fairly current data. It doesn't have to be the most up-to-date, it could be 6-12 months old, but actually information from brands that they may well have heard of or scenarios that they may well have come across then creates a more interesting dimension to their work. So that's a good opportunity for us. The other area I want to talk about is this impact agenda. And for all the academics in the room, when I mentioned the research excellence framework, I suspect there's a cold sweat and a shiver taking place. There's a very large exercise to try and quantify and measure UK research output, partly to allocate funding. It's also, the results from this massive survey is also used to rank universities. And it's been a huge exercise that all the universities in the UK have been engaged in. But principally at the heart of it is the idea of trying to demonstrate the value that public investment in research can produce for the benefit of the economy. So it's a worthy exercise, but in order to do that, there's now an increasing appetite amongst research-based colleagues to engage with organisations, because then we can use these as case studies and examples of how we have had an impact on particular organisations, and hopefully this is a reciprocal relationship. And so certainly if you're interested in working with universities, you'll find that the door is very much ajar in terms of actually wanting to work closer with researchers. I just want to give you a couple of examples really of how this closer cooperation could be beneficial. One with an example that's in place and another from my own research. So one bit of research is around waste management research. Not the most sexy form of research, I have to admit, but a colleague of mine is doing some research which is looking at how you locate or where you locate waste management facilities. And some of the variables include sort of demographic data, like population, population movements, distance between waste management facilities, distance to collection centres, so for the waste management trucks moving around. And they were looking about how they were going to route the trucks, the waste management trucks, around a particular area, particularly when you've got hazardous waste. So you want to minimise the opportunity for there to be any transportation issues. And what they found is that they can develop the model, because the exercise was around developing an analytical model to create the algorithms. But the stumbling blocks was about getting the data to support them build the model. Because otherwise they were using estimates, hypothesizing about the eventualities. But having that data actually enables them to test the model, and therefore it means that the models can be much more accurate. And they experienced some issues around accessing that data. The organisations involved were not very forthcoming about actually giving access to data. But they've sort of kind of worked their way through that. But that took some negotiation. And also, when you think about this particular research, whilst it might not be particularly sexy, the model could be applied in many other areas. So it could be used if you want to think about locating, say, emergency services or even retail stores. The model could be developed in that way. So having access to that data means that we can develop much more accurate models. The other area example I can give you is my own area of research is around dynamic pricing. And in terms of, think about what dynamic pricing is, I suppose it's basically using information that is observed, that's volunteered, inferred or collected about consumers' behaviour or characteristics. And ultimately, coming up with different prices set in real time for different customers. Martin earlier was talking about personalisation. And this is very close to that theme. We are able to personalise all aspects of marketing around the distribution, the product design itself, and the way we promote the product. But actually, we haven't done an awful lot of work around personalisation of the pricing. And I'm also interested in thinking about what the customers are willing to pay. So that's an area I think could have some opportunity there. And in order to think about organisations for whom this may be relevant, the criteria are that they are identifiable market segments. So where you have an industry or an industry sector that can clearly segment its market, where there are different price elasticities of demand for different segments, then this could be interesting. Also where there's some kind of market separation, so where different players in different market segments are not interacting with each other. There's no seepage, there's no leakage between those markets. And the firm must have some degree of monopoly power. So particularly where we have a service or a product that's highly customized, or the relationship between the customer and the organization is so close that nobody else can get involved in that relationship. So we're interested in looking at this idea of what we call price discrimination. So is it desirable? Is it something that is possible to do? What sort of issues does it raise in terms of trust? We talked about transparency earlier. It's hard to conceive of this being useful in a supermarket context where somebody goes into the supermarket and sees different prices on the shelves. But in the London Olympics, some form of price discrimination was taking place. So according to the different period of time before the Olympics took place, there were tickets offered within the same stadium at different prices. In American baseball, this is it's very normal. If you take a flight anywhere in the world, there's a good chance that the person sitting next to you has paid more or less than you have, because some form of price discrimination is already taking place. So I'm quite keen to see whether we can apply this to other industry sectors. And particularly, I'm interested in thinking about financial services, any area where there's some kind of highly personalised service. And one example, I've spoken to a couple of people about this in the energy usage market, thinking about smart meters, for example, and that might enable an organisation to manage demand at peak times. And there's some other examples there. So that's an area I'm personally interested in, and I think working closely with different organisations and having some real data it could make this a much more interesting area. But there might be some barriers. Some of you might be thinking, I'm not too sure about sharing data. There are some questions about confidentiality and anonymity. And somebody else mentioned, I think John mentioned it earlier, this issue about ethics. Certainly all researchers operate under ethical approval of the university. We can assure or guarantee confidentiality and anonymity of findings. So for articles to be published, they can be published without necessarily naming the organisations involved. Timescales, again, that may well be a matter of fact in terms of the academic year. It doesn't always coincide with the speed and time of which the organisation wants to receive some information. So sometimes that does hamper the nature of collaboration. And some people may be thinking about perhaps we're too theoretical, and the work we do is not relevant to business operations. I think that's one of the great opportunities of working together. So we can actually try and develop more applied research, or research that has some practical benefits and practical applications. In terms of the enablers to data sharing, I think some real positive opportunities, looking at diversity of research projects that take place across university. And one of the issues is that perhaps many of you are not actually aware of it. There's a huge diversity of research taking place. There's application of theoretical models, as I suggested, to make sure that the use cases are more sophisticated and to make sure our results are more accurate. There's also an opportunity for industry and the public sector to shape the research agenda, to actually prod us and push us in the direction that where you want to see more research. You know, that's you are, as taxpayers, are funding our research, so that's a fairly reasonable expectation. And where we have worked with organisations, often there are some follow-on projects. There's an opportunity to continue the relationship and actually go a little bit further. And the other thing I would say is if you work with academic researchers, there's always an opportunity to produce work which is for the industry. It's in business language as well as an academic paper. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to receive something that is too full of cryptic jargon. So we can be amenable. Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if you've got any questions, but that's pretty much all I want to say. Thank you.